Imagine stepping out your front door exactly 100 years ago. The air smells like coal smoke and horse manure mixed with something new, gasoline exhaust from the Model T rattling down the street. Somewhere behind a bakery, a door with no sign creaks open just enough to let in a man who whispers a password, and inside, a piano is banging out a tune while people who are breaking federal law dance without a care in the world. This was America in the 1920s, a decade that started with the government trying to make the entire country sober, and ended with the entire country falling into an economic freefall nobody saw coming. In between those two bookends was one of the wildest, fastest, most transformative stretches of change the country had ever experienced. So let's step back in time and walk through what daily life actually looked like when your great-grandparents were young. Our story really begins on January 17, 1920, the day the 18th Amendment officially took effect and outlawed the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcohol across the entire United States. Lawmakers believed banning liquor would clean up society, reduce crime, strengthen families, and make the country more productive. What actually happened was almost the exact opposite. Americans didn't stop drinking, they just stopped drinking in public. Within months, hidden bars called speakeasies began popping up behind unmarked doors in basements, back rooms, and abandoned storefronts, often requiring a password or a special knock just to get inside. These weren't just places to grab a drink, they became full-blown cultural hubs where jazz music played live, where dance crazes like the Charleston took over the floor, and where men and women mingled together in ways that would have scandalized their parents just a decade earlier. Bootleggers smuggled liquor in from Canada and the Caribbean, organized crime syndicates grew rich and powerful running the whole underground operation, and figures like Al Capone became household names. Prohibition was supposed to last forever. Instead, it lasted 13 years, and it accidentally helped birth an entire nightlife culture that still echoes through speakeasy-themed bars today. While people were sneaking around at night, they were driving around by day, because the automobile was quickly transforming from a rich man's toy into something an ordinary family could actually afford. Henry Ford's assembly line techniques had already been improving throughout the previous decade, but by the 1920s, mass production had gotten so efficient that car prices dropped dramatically, putting vehicle ownership within reach of everyday working families for the very first time. And once people had cars, everything else had to catch up. Cities and states poured money into paving roads, building bridges, and cutting tunnels through mountains that used to take days to travel around. Gas stations started popping up on street corners in every town, something that simply didn't exist a generation before. Now, this transformation wasn't instant everywhere. Out in rural America, plenty of roads stayed unpaved dirt tracks for decades longer, meaning a farmer's Model T might get him around town just fine but leave him stuck in the mud after a hard rain. Still, the automobile fundamentally rewired how Americans thought about distance, freedom, and their own daily routines. Suddenly a Sunday drive was a real form of entertainment, and a weekend trip to somewhere 30 miles away was actually possible. Cars weren't the only technology sneaking into American homes during this decade. Radio absolutely exploded in popularity. Between 1923 and 1930, nearly 60% of American households went out and bought a radio set, an astonishing adoption rate for the time. Before this, if you wanted news, you read a newspaper hours or days after something happened. If you wanted music, you either played it yourself or went somewhere it was being performed live. Radio changed all of that overnight. Families would gather around a wooden cabinet in the living room and listen together as a single unit, hearing breaking news, live sporting events, comedy programs, and dramatic serials beamed directly into their homes from hundreds of miles away. It's hard to overstate how magical this must have felt. For the first time in human history, ordinary people in small towns could hear a boxing match happening in New York City as it was actually taking place. Radio didn't just entertain people, it started to unify the country, giving Americans from Maine to California a shared cultural experience for the very first time. Travel itself was also entering a strange and exciting new chapter. Commercial aviation was still in its infancy, and flying was nothing like the smooth, quiet experience we know today. Early passenger planes carried around 20 people at most, and the cabins were loud, cramped, and completely unpressurized, meaning passengers felt every bump and pressure change in the sky. It was thrilling, a little terrifying, and mostly reserved for the adventurous or wealthy. Airships also offered a different kind of aerial experience, floating scenic flights that let passengers drift quietly above cities and coastlines in a way that felt almost dreamlike compared to the noisy airplanes of the era. But despite these new flying machines capturing the public imagination, they weren't yet practical for most Americans. If you needed to travel any real distance, you took the train. And 1920s trains were nothing to scoff at, featuring elegant dining cars with white tablecloth service and sleeping cars that let passengers stretch out for an overnight journey across the country. The golden age of rail travel was still going strong, even as the airplane hovered on the horizon as a hint of what travel would eventually become. All of this technological change was happening alongside a massive shift in where Americans actually lived. For generations, the country had been overwhelmingly rural, with most families working farms and buying their goods from a local general store that stocked a little bit of everything. But the 1920s accelerated a migration towards cities that had already been building for years. Factory jobs, higher wages, and the promise of modern conveniences pulled people off the farm and into growing urban centers. And once they got there, their shopping habits changed too. The cozy, familiar general store started facing serious competition from something totally new, the retail chain store. Companies like Woolworths began opening standardized locations across multiple cities, offering low prices and consistent products no matter which town you were in. At the same time, grand urban department stores, places like Macy's in New York, were becoming genuine destinations, offering multiple floors of clothing, furniture, and household goods all under one roof, often with elaborate window displays designed to turn shopping into an event rather than just a chore. And speaking of turning things into events, nothing captured the American imagination during this decade quite like the movies. Hollywood was hitting its stride, and going to the picture show became one of the most popular pastimes in the entire country. By the middle of the decade, movie theaters were seeing an astonishing 50 million visits every single week, a staggering number when you consider the country's total population at the time. These were still silent films, accompanied by live piano or organ music in the theater, but audiences were captivated regardless. Then in 1927, everything changed again with the arrival of talkies, movies with synchronized sound. For the first time, audiences could actually hear actors speak, hear music swell at just the right moment, hear footsteps and gunshots and laughter woven directly into the story. The impact was immediate and enormous. Weekly attendance more than doubled as Americans rushed to experience this new form of storytelling. Movie stars became bigger celebrities than ever before, and going to the cinema became a weekly ritual for millions of families across the country. With more disposable income, more free time, and a shiny new car in the driveway, Americans also started rethinking how they spent their leisure hours. Beach culture surged in popularity as families used their automobiles to escape to the coast or to nearby lakes for the day. And with that shift toward outdoor recreation came a genuine fashion revolution. Swimwear got noticeably shorter and less restrictive compared to the heavy, modest bathing costumes of previous decades. Fashion in general loosened up dramatically, with women in particular embracing shorter hemlines, looser silhouettes, and a more liberated overall style that reflected the changing social attitudes of the era. This was the age of the flapper, a term used to describe young women who cut their hair short, wore their skirts above the ankle, and openly embraced the jazz clubs, the dancing, and the general spirit of independence that defined the decade. It felt, for millions of Americans, like the good times would simply never stop. But of course, we know how this story ends. All of that momentum, the cars, the radios, the movie palaces, the speakeasies, the beach trips, all of it came crashing down in the final months of 1929, when the stock market collapsed and plunged the country into the Great Depression. The Roaring Twenties earned their nickname because they truly did roar, representing one of the most rapid bursts of technological and cultural transformation in American history. But that roar came to an abrupt and painful stop, leaving behind a decade that Americans would look back on for the rest of the century, sometimes with nostalgia, and sometimes as a cautionary tale about how quickly prosperity can vanish. Either way, the changes that took root during those 10 wild years, from the automobile to the radio to the movies, permanently reshaped what everyday American life would look like for generations to come.